This is the Opposition Leader, Sussan Ley.
And in coming days, the Shadow Cabinet and the Joint Party Room will meet in the usual way. But I want to be extremely clear today. The opposition has extremely serious concerns about the government's legislation. The legislation does not address the real issues that gave rise to the Bondi attack. It doesn't address Islamic extremism. It doesn't address ISIS influence. And it doesn't address the rise of antisemitism and the associated terrorist threat in Australia. What the bill does is clumsily try to address hate speech and control firearms. To date, the legislation has not stood the basic scrutiny as part of the parliamentary inquiry that is ongoing and has taken place over the last couple of days. Now, having heard evidence from the department, legal experts and the community, it is clear the legislation protects hate preachers by making exemptions for things written in religious texts, but fails to define what those religious texts may be. It risks criminalising speech that has nothing to do with anti-Semitism or radical Islam. It sets up a gun buyback scheme that we don't even know if the states will support. These are not minor drafting issues. They go to whether these laws will work at all. Now, there are two tests for this legislation. The first, eradicate anti-Semitism, and the second, crack down on radical Islamic extremism. The laws achieve neither of these things. There's more than 500 pages of legislation, and the term radical Islam is not mentioned once. If the Prime Minister can't name the problem, he can't tackle it. Our job is to pass laws that contain clear offences for courts and police to use. Instead, the flaws in this bill will add confusion and delay in the charging and sentencing of terrorist offenders. We are being asked to consider sweeping powers, yet the government has not been able to explain how key provisions would operate in practice and what conduct would actually be captured. The Attorney-General's Department couldn't tell us if phrases like globalise the intifada or from the river to the sea would be captured by this law. Officials couldn't even answer whether a fatwa preached by an Islamic extremist was classified as a religious text. If the government can't explain how the legislation will work, the Parliament can't be expected to vote for it, and the community cannot possibly have confidence in it. Now, legal expert Chris Merritt said the religious text exemption amounted to a guide for hate preachers by telling them exactly what they need to do in order to continue to promote racial hatred. While ECAJ Co-Chief Executive Peter Wertheim said the proposal created a very wide loophole that would be exploited to render the introduction of this offence ineffective. And that directly contradicts what we should be trying to achieve. The parliamentary inquiry should have brought clarity. Instead, questions put to the department have produced more questions than answers. Even at this late stage, the department cannot clearly tell Australians what will fall foul of the law when it comes to hate preaching and what will not. And this is an extraordinary position for a government to be in when proposing criminal sentences. Laws of this seriousness demand precision, confidence and clarity. What we have instead is confusion and contradiction. Now, the opposition will continue to scrutinise this legislation carefully, but from what we have seen so far, it looks pretty unsalvageable. As it stands, the government's proposal is half-baked and Australians deserve far better. Next week, the opposition will head to Canberra, seeking to advance our comprehensive and practical package of measures, which we have said we will introduce. These changes to legislation will tackle anti-Semitism head-on in education, the arts and society more broadly, and critically enshrine a definition of anti-Semitism in law. We have based these changes on the recommendations of the government's own anti-Semitism envoy, Gillian Segal. We've been very clear. Under our package, our message to those who preach hatred, who preach radical Islamic extremist hatred, glorify terrorism or incite violence, it's very clear. If you're not an Australian citizen, you will be deported. And if you are an Australian citizen, you will be arrested. That is what we will be seeking to achieve when the Parliament returns. The Parliament has to eradicate anti-Semitism and remove radical Islam. Those are our tests. Happy to take questions.
Just to be clear, the laws the government are proposing are not restrictive enough, in your view?
The Parliament can and should be able to do these two things with this legislation. Criminalise radical Islamic extremist hate preaching without impinging on free speech. Now, that's a clear test. And I've said from the very beginning, eradicate anti-Semitism, remove radical Islam. Instead, we've got this bundle of measures heading in many different directions, criticised in a very valid way by a whole range of people, but not actually addressing the issue. Let's remember why we are where we are. We had the worst ever terror attack on Australian soil. The Parliament should have been reconvened then, before Christmas, to actually demonstrate leadership, compassion and the determination that I have spoken of every day since to tackle radical Islamic extremism and eradicate anti-Semitism. The New South Wales Parliament came back before Christmas, but our Parliament still has not returned. Instead, we have had a Prime Minister who froze for 25 days, unable to find a political fix for what he saw as a political problem, when the nation demanded leadership and moral courage and moral clarity. We had 25 days of confusion before we even had the Royal Commission that victims and their families, in the midst of their heartbreak, had to call for, and every fair-minded Australian had to call for. And now we are presented with this legislation that doesn't even tackle the two things that every Australian knows that it must, in a clear, precise and targeted way. Well, the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence is continuing to meet, and obviously it will continue to have discussions. That will happen over the next 2 days. But as I've said, the bill as it stands is pretty unsalvageable because it doesn't, in its essence, address the two things. And it can and it should. Well, as I said, the PJCIS, as we call it, is continuing to meet. Submissions have been made and the report will be written. But what we have seen so far in the inability of the government to even explain within its own committee process what their legislation would affect in different situations, what conduct would be captured and what conduct would not be, makes it pretty much unsalvageable at this point. But we will let that committee process take its course. My excellent shadow ministers are in the committee today.
You think you stood by Jewish Australians and that they must be consulted on this legislation. A lot of them have said, I've told you what they want, and a lot of them are supportive of this government's legislation. Why are you now not supporting?
Well, let me remind you of Peter Wertheim, and he has said the proposal created a very wide loophole that would be exploited to render the introduction of this offence, the offence being hate preaching, ineffective. So that was from Peter Wertheim, and it directly contradicts what we're trying to achieve. Now, he also commented on the Prime Minister's reference to the Old Testament. He said it was ill-advised and an unfortunate trope, and that Jewish Australians had contacted him to say they were insulted.
Now, you've demanded that the PM recall Parliament to implement Julian Segal's antisemitism report in full. Now, that report includes criminalising the incitement of racial hatred as a key action. My apologies. Is it a little hypocritical to have a problem with Labor's new laws?
I completely reject that assertion. We called for the Parliament to be recalled, to hold a condolence motion, to honour the victims, to help the nation come together, and we also wanted immediate action. The government has delivered neither. They fought the nation on the Royal Commission. They've taken a month to deliver this bad bill. Now, had they listened to us, which they should have in the weeks after Bondi, we could already have had a package introduced into the Parliament with the necessary parliamentary scrutiny already underway, with a month to have had that inquiry, that scrutiny and that submissions. So let's not forget, the sooner Parliament was recalled, the more time we would have had to look at any bill. And we believe, as an opposition, that we should have had the opportunity to introduce our measures, which we will seek to do when the Parliament does return, and which we announced weeks ago and we know are the best response to the Bondi terror attack, and which the Prime Minister did not consider. We were not consulted in the lead-up to this late, rushed introduction of legislation.
Can I just be clear here, sorry, are you putting forward amendments towards the bill, or are you looking to just abandon what the government's proposed altogether?
What I said is that the parliamentary committee that is scrutinising this bill is still underway. It's considering further submissions today, it's writing a report in the next couple of days. Necessarily, we will wait for that process. But what I've indicated is that the bill is pretty unsalvageable. And I invite any of you to have another look at the questioning that was in the public domain from my team to the government with respect to how this bill would work in practice. And the answers were simply not there. And if you look across the wide spectrum of commentary today, we have got fair-minded, ordinary Australians, I suspect, asking themselves a simple question: why are we not tackling radical Islamic extremist hate preaching? Why does the bill not mention radical Islam once? And where are the strong measures to eradicate antisemitism without impinging on free speech?
So after that committee meets, you will then decide whether you're abandoning support for the bill or proposing amendments. It's too soon now for you to...
I've already indicated we'll go through our processes.
He's also said that this is a step in the right direction as advocating for have the Jewish leaders offered you their support in potentially opposing this bill? And why not work constructively with the government to create something that both parties can support?
Well, just on that last point, I want to make it clear that I said from day one we would work constructively with the government. They did not share any drafts of this legislation with us until right at the last minute. When? They did. But in designing the legislation, they did not consult us. So we stood ready with our own package of measures that responded directly to the worst terror attack, the extremist Islamic hatred that was behind that attack, and the growing anti-Semitism in this country over the last 2 years. We confronted that fair and square in our package of measures, which would be designed to be implemented in keeping with a Royal Commission that had an early report specifically with the tests that we set for it. And I point you once again to Peter Wertheim's commentary and lack of confidence in this critical area of the bill that deals with religious texts. The bill does not do the two things that Australians expect it to do in the wake of the Bondi terror attack. The Parliament can and should be able to criminalise radical Islamic extremist hate preaching without impinging on free speech. And that's a central test. It's straightforward. It stems directly from this targeted attack on a group of people because of their identity and their faith, on a mass lethal shooting that horrified the whole country, whose causes and consequences need close and careful analysis with clear eyes and confronting uncomfortable truths, Prime Minister, uncomfortable truths about what your government knew, what warnings they had, what they did and did not do. This bill does not address those concerns.
First part of the question, are you content that the provisions to list extremist hate organisations?
I've answered that question with respect.
The Constitution forbids the Commonwealth from prohibiting the free expression of religion. The constitutional experts say that this means that all religious texts are exempt, so how would you get around that?
Well, the government has presented a bill with a carefully planned excuse for hate preachers. I think they have opportunities to get around that. Yeah.
Last question.
Muslim communities say they feel unfairly targeted and excluded from this legislation. When the anti-Semitism envoy released, when the Islamophobia envoy released his report, we said he'd consider it. It's been a few months now. What is your position on that report? And would you equally call on the government to accept the recommendation?
We have to once again step back and look at what we are confronting here as a country. We are confronting radical extremist Islamic hatred in the form of preaching, and the consequences of that extremism were writ large on December the 14th. And anti-Semitism has been allowed to fester and grow in this country. And we in the Coalition have borne witness to this in the conversations we've had, in the examples, in the feeling of being less safe that Jewish Australians have talked about every single day, in the rising tide of crime, whether it be graffiti or car firebombing or synagogues being attacked and firebombed or a childcare centre being attacked, or the Jewish community having to live their life behind locked gates and armed guards. This is the thing that we have to confront in this country, and the Coalition will do it in a clear, precise way when we go back to Parliament and demand that we have legislation to address these things. Thank you very much.
That's the Opposition Leader Sussan Ley, certainly hardening the position on Labor's proposed changes to hate speech law.